I'm going to introduce the first speaker for the night. This brother is a brother that I know for quite some time, going back to the year 95, I think, which would make it like, what, 22 years by now? A very, very strong brother, a teacher, a chief man in our community that I come from. There's a lot to be said about this brother. He's a brother that wherever he goes, there's a spirit of discipline and brotherhood and love for his people. This is a brother that's a family man and a teacher in Israel going back to the 1980s. Very, very strong brother and a leader indeed. I want to have everybody embrace our brother, Chief Uzziel Ben Levi.
Blessed be. First, I want to start out by giving all praises and honor to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yehovah by name. In this presentation, I've actually been doing this for years, and my brother Zion Lex asked me to come out and share it with the people. The whole presentation is about the pagan origins of all the Christmas symbols. And it's important to know because sometimes as people, we get into things that we really don't know about. There's a lot of things in history and things that we've seen in history that we just get into and we just don't know the origins of them. And these things are the things that cause us to, especially in our community, cause us to err, cause us to fall back, cause us to go backwards or keep the wool over our eyes. So these are things that we have to break free of because these are the things that will continue to hold us down. I like to say peace, shalom, Islam to the brothers, and I hope that my presentation will be something that when you leave out of here, you'll be more educated than when you were when you first came in, and that it will be something that you could pass down to someone else and be able to get something out of it, because that's the most important thing. So with that, I hope that you get something out the lesson, and I hope that, can everyone see the PowerPoint clearly? All right. So Christmas and its pagan origins. What do we know about Xmas? Anybody in here? What do you know about Xmas and its origins? Anyone in here? Yes, my brother. What's your name?
Daniel.
Daniel. What do you know about Xmas and its origins? Or what did you learn being a child about Xmas? What did you learn? Not what you know now, but what did you learn when you were a child about Xmas?
It was so-called Christ's birthday.
Uh-huh. And what else? What else came along with Xmas? My man, my brother right here. What's your name, brother?
Monel.
Monel. What else?
Santa Claus exchanging gifts.
Santa Claus exchanging gifts. And there was also a spirit that came with Xmas. Am I right or wrong? I mean, it was called the what?
Christmas spirit.
The Christmas spirit. So with that Christmas spirit came a lot of things. And we see the Christmas spirit within when we go into stores. You know, even us being conscious at this time, we get into the Christmas spirit not knowing. Because when you go into the stores, you hear Mariah Carey all day. All I want for Christmas is you. That song is in your head, am I right or wrong? It's in your head. And that's part of the Christmas spirit. Subliminally, they make us go out and spend more than we usually do. So why do I say that? All they hitting you in the head with is Xbox, the new Xbox. What is it? The Xbox what? The white one. What is it called? Xbox what?
360.
One? Xbox One S. Right? The white one. Shows everything in 4K. So subliminally they're getting into our children's minds. And our children, although we have knowledge of self, will find themselves coming to you and say, Daddy, Mommy, I want the Xbox One, or I want the new toy that's out there. Why? Because in this society, during the holiday seasons, they make a third of their money. Understand what that is. So even if we bring forth the truth, the pagan origins of all these holidays, right? They are not going to stop celebrating it because me and you say that it's pagan. Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is what matters. So therefore they start Before it used to be right after Thanksgiving. But now you see Christmas advertisement all the way back to September. And this is part of the whole movement that they have going on in order to keep us spending and spending and spending. As black folks or melanated people, we are some of the people that spend the most in this society. So now we have to think wisely and we have to spend wisely, because it affects us, it affects our bottom line, and it affects everything that we do. Now, the mythology of it, Santa Claus. We've been told for years that a fat man came down a chimney, right? Came down a chimney, whether it was a fire burning or not, but he came down a chimney and he put gifts underneath the trees, and that's where you got your Christmas presents from. Now, our parents bust their behinds. So now you're going to give credit to a Caucasian man with gray hairs, and that he gave you all these things when your parents went through the whole year busting their behind to be able to afford and give you these presents. But the credit is given to a white man, to a Caucasian man. So it's all psychological. You understand what I'm saying? So we grow up thinking that the white man has given us everything. The white man is the one that provides everything for us. You understand what I'm saying? So these things are the things that we have to keep in mind. And now we're going to get into some of the pagan customs and origins and some of the pagan symbols of Christianity. What is Xmas or Christmas? Christmas, Christian festival celebrating the birth of Jesus. The English term Christmas or Mass on Christ's Day is of a fairly recent origin. It's a fairly recent origin because most European countries didn't start celebrating Christmas till maybe the 18th century, if even that late. In America, I believe at the turn of the 19th century, they weren't even celebrating Christmas. So these are things that we have to be aware of. So where does the name come from? The Mass on Christ's Day. The earlier term Yule may have been derived from the Germanic Jol or the Anglo-Saxon Gi-O, which referred to the feast of the winter solstice. Anybody in here know what the winter solstice is? And what day it falls on? The winter solstice. Anyone? So the winter solstice, you know, you have a summer solstice, right? Which is the beginning of summer. The beginning of summer begins on June 21st on the calendar, on every calendar. So from June 21st all the way to the winter solstice, which is December 21st, the sun begins to go down earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier. So we get to the winter solstice. Now the winter solstice is when, especially here in the northern part of the hemisphere, we get daylight to be shortest in the day. So now this is important because the earth sits on a tilt, right? And it revolves around its axis what? How long does it take the earth to revolve around its axis? Around his axis is what? That's if it revolves around the sun, it takes 365.
24 hours.
All right, it takes 24 hours to revolve on that axis. So now what happens is, in the time that it takes for the earth to revolve around its axis, it's revolving also around the sun. So it's revolving around its axis and it's going around the sun. It takes about 365 days and some hours for the actual earth to revolve around the sun, which it makes a year, right? But in that period of time, you have all these things going on, these solstices going on. So now from June 21st all the way to December 21st, you have the days shortening and shortening and shortening and shortening. Now if you're closer to the equator, the time stays the same. Day and night is about a 12-hour period, right? But since we are in North America, you will see that's why we have daylight saving times and we have all these different things where they adjust time, because we get into a point where we get into the winter solstice, and in the winter solstice, what happens for a period of about 3 days, the strength of the sun stays about the same. or the strength of the sunlight. The days stay at the same short period of time. Now, after that, the sun begins to take longer and longer to go down, right?
There's another very interesting phenomenon that occurs around December 25th, or the winter solstice. From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the days become shorter and colder. And from the perspective of the northern hemisphere, the sun appears to move south and get smaller and more scarce. The shortening of the days and the expiration of the crops when approaching the winter solstice symbolize the process of death to the ancients. It was the death of the sun. And by December 22nd, the sun's demise was fully realized, for the sun, having moved south continually for 6 months, makes it to its lowest point in the sky. Here a curious thing occurs. The sun stops moving south, at least perceivably, for 3 days. And during this 3-day pause, the sun resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross, or Crux, constellation. And after this time, on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, this time north, foreshadowing longer days, warmth, and spring. And thus it was said, the sun died on the cross, was dead for 3 days, only to be resurrected or born again.
Ancient societies celebrated the winter solstice because it was a time of the renewing, or the renewing strength of the sun, the S-U-N, the sun. So now we're going to see how it evolved into being the day of the birth of the sun, the S-O-N, and how it was Christianized from its pagan origins. It says here, the corresponding terms in other languages, Navidad in Spanish, Natale in Italian, Noel in French, all probably denote nativity. So we all know about the nativity scene, right? So what's in the nativity scene?
You got a manger.
You got a manger with baby Jesus in it.
You got 3 wise men.
You got 3 wise men. And who else? Joseph and who else? And Mary. So that's what the origins of the name Navidad, Natale, and these Latin-speaking countries. Since the early 20th century, Christmas has also been a secular family holiday observed by Christians and non-Christians alike, devoid of Christian elements and marked by an increasingly elaborate exchange of gifts. In this secular Christmas celebration, a mythical figure named Santa Claus plays a pivotal role. So we're going to talk about Santa Claus later, but now we get into the point where it doesn't matter where you come from in the world. If you come from Saudi Arabia and you've been in America long enough and your children grow up here, guess what they do? They celebrate Christmas. Although in their way of life, they know right now in Saudi Arabia is a regular day of work. If you come from Jordan, you come here, your kids are that, and they start passing out Christmas gifts. Why? Because it's become such a it's become such a money-making machine that they get into the minds of our children. And then the parents fall victim to the same thing instead of holding on strong. Because all these things are pagan. It has nothing to do with us. It's like our children come over, or the children come over here, and they take hold of the traditions of the customs of the land, and that's how they begin to lose their children. And that's why you see in the East, they're so opposed to Western society because they're afraid of losing their children to the Western mentality that we have here today. Because what happens is that your children lose their traditions and their value. Now you begin to get that new world order that we always hear about.
فالكريسماس بالنسبه لنا عباره عن موسم ان احنا بنبقى يعني موسم انبساط، موسم تجمع. احنا ما بنوصلهاش من معنى ديني قد ما هي حاجه ثقافيه. العالم كله بيعملها، بكل الاديان بيعملوها، الشجره.
كريسماس بالنسبه لي يعني الاوكيجن الناس كلها والشوارع وبره منوره والناس مبسوطه وكده، فمالهاش دعوه بدين اكتر ما لها دعوه ان هي حاجه بتفرح الناس مش اكتر يعني.
that one mind frame. The whole world thinking one way. So now, this is what's happened now. It's no longer a Christian celebration. Now it becomes a global celebration that even though people don't really believe in the story of Christ being born on this day, it's such a large celebration that everyone is in the spirit of the celebration, and everybody is buying gifts, and everybody is doing all that is involved with the Christmas celebration. So this is what's going on in society now. So you will see a Hindu, a Sikh walking around with Christmas presents with a turban on, which is off kilter, because that's not what he grew up celebrating. But because he is immersed into society, into Western society, this is what he's doing now. And this is what he's into now. Us as a melanated people who was brought from the west coast of Africa, we didn't know nothing about Xmas when we first got here. How did we get into that? We were following the slave master's religion. And that's how we got into it. And us as a people, we're the biggest consumers during this time and during this season. And we was to take our money that we spend during Xmas season and put it into something productive. We will have all types of businesses, all types of schools, all types of things that will be progressive within our community. But they keep us deaf, dumb, and blind, and keep us going and buy presents, and keep us spending our money, keep us in a financial hole that it takes us a whole year to get out of. Because right now people blew up their credit cards from buying so many things. God forbid you got a large family. If you got 10 nieces and nephews, if you got aunts and uncles, they all want presents. Because it's the mentality, it's the Christmas spirit that we're into right now. Let's go to the next slide. How did December 25th become the birth of Jesus? The precise origin of assigning December 25th as the birth of Jesus is unclear. The New Testament provides no clues in this regard. Nowhere in the New Testament are you going to see December 25th as the birth of Jesus. Nowhere in there is it going to say that this is the day that this man was born. But it was this particular holiday was Christianized. It was made the birth of Jesus. December 25th was first identified as the date of Jesus' birth by Sextus Julius Africanus in 221 CE, Common Era, and later became the universally accepted date. One widespread explanation of the origin of this date is that December 25th was the Christianizing of the Dies Solis Invictus Nati, day of the birth of the unconquered sun, a popular holiday in the Roman Empire that celebrated the winter solstice as a symbol of the resurgence of the sun, the casting away of winter, and the heralding of the rebirth of spring and summer. So this is the origins of Xmas. Now you have more ancient societies that you could go back to and you could identify certain festivals that they celebrated, but I chose to stick with the Roman Empire because it's the most recent empire and it's something that we could relate to at this time. So now, Julius Africanus in 21 CE, he was the one that said, all right, I'm gonna put the stamp on this. This is the day that Jesus was born. And from then on, we know about Emperor Constantine, right? We heard about Emperor Constantine, right? He was the one that did what? He made Christianity what? The state religion of Rome. So now, what happened with Emperor Constantine? Emperor Constantine was in a predicament. He had a bunch of pagans, because Romans were pagan. He had a bunch of pagans that were bucking the system of Christianity. Now Christians were growing during this time. A tribe of Christians were growing. And he became involved with Christianity. And when he became the emperor of Rome, he decided to make Christianity the state religion of Rome. But what? He had problems on his hands. Because all these people that had been pagan all these years said, hell to the nah, Constantine, we ain't going for that. And we know about Roman history, they'll kill you in a minute. So what did Constantine do? He said, okay, we are going to find a way to make this stuff work out. So what did Constantine do? He said, we're going to take the Dies Solis Invicti Nati, which was the day of Saturnalia, which was a celebration in Rome that they celebrating Saturn, and also it was during the time of the winter solstice. And like I told you, in ancient societies, the winter solstice was celebrated because people thought that it was the rebirth of the sun. Like it's saying right here. It was December 25th was the Christianizing of the Dies Solis Invicti Nati, day of the birth of the unconquered sun. So this is what they also celebrated during the Saturnalia in Rome. They worshiped the sun. If you see ancient artifacts of Emperor Constantine and his coin, on one side it will have Constantine's face, and on the other side it will have the symbol of the sun. This showed that he was a pagan, but he later changed to Christianity, and he took the traditions of paganism and put them into Christianity in order to appease the pagan followers of his, and so that they will be able to accept Christianity much easier. So the celebration of the Saturnalia was revelry, people giving each other's gifts, people having feasts. They sacrificed the pig, which is still prevalent in the Christmas celebration today. Everyone in their homes right now have a big piece of ham. Yeah, that's what they have. They're eating that right now. If you come from a Christian background and you came from that, you understood that on this day it was a big ham on the table. And this was all part of the Saturnalia and also of the winter solstice celebration that they did in Rome. It says, coming down here, indeed, after December 25th had become widely accepted as the date of Jesus' birth, Christian writers frequently made the connection between the rebirth of the sun, the S-U-N, and the birth of the sun, S-O-N. So it was easy for them to make one fall into the other because it almost sounds the same. S-O-N, S-U-N is almost the same. So is the rebirth of the unconquered sun, which was the winter solstice celebration. And now since we Christianized it, now we can say it's the rebirth of the S-O-N sun. Or it's the birth of the S-O-N sun. Not the rebirth, but the birth of the S-O-N sun. Like I said earlier, nowhere in the New Testament are you going to find Jesus' birth. There's no date to it. Now, as far as giving birth, when you look in the Old Testament, it speaks about on the 14th day of the first month, right? It shall be to you the Passover. Say on the 15th day of the same month should begin the feast of unleavened bread. And you should celebrate that for 7 days. And on the first day and on the 7th day of that feast, you shall have holy convocations. The 7th month, the first day, it should be a day of blowing. We call it Yom Teruah. Right? It says on the 10th day of the same month shall be Yom Kippur. So in scriptures, we certainly have places where dates are called out and days of the month. So if this was truly Jesus' birthday, it would have been called out and it would have been written out. So we see where traditions came across each other and people made them fit in order to appease one group of people with another group of people. It says, one of the difficulties with this view is that it suggests a nonchalant willingness on the part of the Christian church to appropriate a pagan festival when the early church was so intent on distinguishing itself categorically from pagan beliefs and practices. So the early church fathers wanted no part of paganism. They didn't want a Christmas celebration with Saturnalia. They didn't want to intertwine both. But as time and society came along, and as we go down, we're going to see all the other traditions that were incorporated into this Christmas celebration. So as time went on, people accepted it more and more and more. It's like if you see your children, you have a dietary law, you live a certain way, and your children constantly keep breaking it. They keep breaking it. They keep bringing pork into the house. They keep bringing Chinese food into the house. And you stop saying something about it, eventually that's going to spread through the house. And everybody's going to accept it. And then your other children are going to begin to eat it. And then their children are going to begin to eat it. So because the Christian fathers, they appeased it and they kind of turned a blind eye to it, then it became good and it became Christian tradition throughout the centuries. Let us move to the next slide. Origins of the Christmas tree. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the use of evergreen trees, wreaths, garlands to symbolize eternal life was a custom of ancient Egyptians, Chinese, and Hebrews. Yes, Hebrews. And you said, well, what are you talking about, Uzziah? Hebrews. We worship trees. That's why the Most High spoke to us about in Jeremiah chapter 10, about we go into the forest, we chop down the tree, we adorn it with gold and with silver, because we fell into pagan traditions. We fell into pagan traditions. So the Christmas tree was one of them, or the evergreen tree. And now we're going to get a little bit more into why they use the evergreen tree during winter, and the origins of why they were using this tree. It says, tree worship was common among the pagan Europeans and survived their conversion to Christianity in the Scandinavian customs of decorating the house and born with evergreens at the new year to scare away the devil, and of setting up a tree for the birds during Christmas time. So what they believed was that the evergreen possessed magical powers, because everything else died. When fall came, everything else died. All the other greenery was gone. And this was the only tree that survived winter. So in their minute minds, they thought certainly there has to be some mystical power with this tree. Because no matter what hits it, winter, snow, heat, whatever, it still survives. So they thought there was magical power in the evergreen. So what they did, they brought it into the house in the form of wreaths, in the form of the Christmas tree, or the evergreen tree, the pine tree. And they brought it into their homes because they thought that it watered away the devil or evil spirits. So that's why I'm bringing you the pagan origins of all of these. Roman midwinter festival of Saturnalia, houses were decorated with wreaths of evergreen plants, along with other antecedent customs now associated with Christmas. The modern Christmas tree is frequently traced to the symbolism of trees in pre-Christian winter rites, wherein Viking and Saxon worshiped trees. The story of Saint Boniface cutting down Donor's oak illustrates the pagan practices in the 8th century among the Germans. A later folk version of the story adds the detail that an evergreen tree grew in place of the fell oak, telling them about how its triangular shape reminds humanity of the Trinity and how it points to heaven. So we took stories, fairy tales from Vikings, from Saxons, and they just took whatever story they might have had and they just incorporated everything to make it fit. They made an amalgamation. They made everything fit. No matter where it came down, what part of Europe it came from, they just took whatever fairy tales they had and made it fit. We'll move straight ahead. Is this making sense to y'all? Is it making sense? All right. The Yule Log. We got all types of songs, you know. We got songs about the Yule Log, but what's the origins of the Yule Log? It's burnt during this time, right? This is a pagan custom from Yule festival of the Teutonic and Celtic tribes, which Yule festival was in honor of the god Thor. So the Celtic tribes are basically the Gallic nations, which are the nations from Western Europe. I think some of those nations are like part of Germany, North Italy. You got the French, people from Luxembourg. You got all these different people that that were part of these Gallic tribes or Celtic tribes, right? Festival was in honor of the god Thor. We see Thor today, it's a mythical figure. You can look at the Avengers and you see it all in there, but there's a story behind Thor. The Saxons and Goths burned the Yule log at the festival of the winter solstice. So one thing that we see that all these people have in common is that they all celebrated what? The winter what? The solstice. Right? They all celebrated that. Thank you, my brother. They all celebrated the winter solstice. It says each year a brand was saved to rekindle the new fire. So from year to year they kept the brand from this particular log, right, to rekindle the new log that will come the next year. It says here, remnants were believed to have magic powers, and the log symbolized protection against evil spirits. All these people were all concerned with evil spirits, demonic spirits, and this is what was going on in Europe. You know, they all believed that there was spookism and all types of stuff going on. Fortunes were told by the Yule log, and its light was considered sacred. To the ancestors of the Catholic faith, Christmas was called the Feast of Lights. The lights and fires incorporated into the nativity celebration were made to symbolize the fact that the darkness of the world was past and true light now shone. This background explains the lights on Christmas tree. Everything about the Christmas fire and lights was considered very sacred. The blaze of the fire was made to symbolize Christ as the light of the world. So they took every pagan tradition and connected it to Christianity. Made it part of Christianity. And this is where we stand today. Christmas candles. The Yule candle was burned as a companion to the Yule log. The modern candles set in windows have their origin in the Yule candle. The tradition was brought to this country by the Irish. In Ireland, during the years of religious suppression, candles were put in the windows to attract fugitive priests who would know it was safe to enter the houses and to say mass. Modern candles used for decoration, though electric and not waxen, incorporate the same principle the Catholic Church set before as Christ, the light of the world. So the candles represent Christ being the light of the world, and this was also, these candles was an indication to these fugitive priests who were banned from doing mass during this time. They were persecuted. So the people put candles. In those days, they were waxing, but they put candles alongside the windows so that the priest would know which house was safe to come in there and continue in the Xmas celebration. Evergreens, we kind of went over this, but this is a little bit more. You have already read how houses and public places were decorated with evergreens during the Saturnalia and calends of January. They were never sought merely for the decorative capabilities. The evergreens were used as defense against demons and witches. They thought were especially prevalent during this time of the year. So it speaks about the mythology of that time and what the people believed, what their psychology was, that they believed that there were witches and demons roaming around. So they needed this plant to protect them because it was forever green. They thought the winter demons were afraid of the greens because they stayed green all year. Green belongs in the realm of summer and life. Winter kills most of summer's vegetation, but the evergreens remain steadfast. They were symbols of everlasting life to the heathen. We know better today. We understand what that is, but back then, the people didn't understand that. They, especially Europeans, they had no knowledge of this, or they didn't grasp this. At first, the church frowned upon this intrusion of paganism into the sacred season on account of the superstitious sentiments which were bound up with them. So the church knew that this was superstition. The early church fathers understood that this was superstitious, but it was too deeply rooted for prohibitions to have permanent effect, and in due course they were annulled or forgotten. because they adjusted to whatever traditions, wherever you came from in Europe, you had, and you incorporated into the Christmas celebration. So they adjusted, and they just conformed to whatever was there. It says, instead of banning them, she more often permitted their continuance, directing her efforts towards investing them with the new sanctity and meaning. So that's when we call as Israelites, we call Christianity pagan. We have a right to call it pagan because it's entrenched in pagan tradition. It has a whole bunch of pagan background to it.
That's right.
Idol worshiping is pagan. God didn't command us to worship idols. He told us, in fact, he told us not to make to yourself any idols and don't bow down to them. In the Roman Catholic Church, you have about 13 stations you have to get to before you get to Christ. So these are the things that we have to keep in mind. And this is why sometimes we go so hard against Christianity, because of the paganism that's incorporated in it, that the church fathers allowed to be incorporated in it. It says, while they were often made to represent higher and holier things, the older notions were not always discarded. Hence the mixture of ideas, pagan and Christian, which became entwisted with the greenery of the season, the plants which more than any others entwined themselves about the festival are holly, ivy, mistletoe, and rosemary. Deck the halls. Anybody knows this song? Come on, y'all know that song.
You know that song.
You know it. You know the melody of it. So the actual melody is, the original melody was not a Christian song. I believe it was, it flees me right now, I think it was a Dutch writer who wrote a song that had nothing to do with Christmas, but once the melody was taken in the 1890s and it was transformed into an Xmas song. So we know it. Deck the halls with balls of holly, fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly, fa la 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 la. So that's what we see there, right? So what's holly? Because we always say, we say things, we repeat things. You might have had to sing this song in elementary school. Maybe you had a Christmas, what they call them, Christmas show. Right? And they had you sing, you was part of the choir, and you was singing this, and you didn't know what half of this stuff was. So what's holly? Let's take a look at holly. Holly, this is the holly plant, which is also a plant that stays green throughout winter. You can find this plant right here in New York City. Jersey, you can find it all throughout this eastern region, you can find it. Holly was admired by heathen Druids. Anybody know who the Druids were? Celtic. But Druids were the educated class of the Celtic people, right? And the Celtic tribes was the tribes that like the Germans, North Italy, people of Western Europe, so forth and so on. So this plant was admired by them, by the educated class of these Celtic tribes, who believed that its evergreen leaves attested to the fact that the sun never deserted it. And since the sun was held in worship, holly was sacred. Holly was supposed to be hateful to witches and was therefore placed on doors and windows to keep out evil spirits. So now people make a mistake. People think that holly, this is a holly plant. This is not a mistletoe. People mistake this as a mistletoe, right? Because what happens is, people decorate their homes with this, put the holly plant over the doors, and do all these things. But there's a distinct difference between holly and a mistletoe, and we're going to get to a mistletoe later. But as you see, all these things have the same common ground. They ward away evil spirits, they keep witches away, and so forth and so on. Under the influence of Christian thought and sentiment, holly became very sacred. The red berries on the holly once had a pagan meaning, being the blood of drops of a beautiful Balder, the ill-fated darling of Valhalla. Given this new Christian meaning, the berries now speak of the blood drops which the cruel crown of thorns drew from the Savior's brow, which is who? Christ. So it no longer had a meaning or significance that came from the Druids or the pagan custom of these Western Europeans, but now it was Christianized. The berries even have a meaning. It no longer meant that it was now the whole thing with Balder and all that is, we're gonna get to that, but that's a story or a mythology story. Balder was the son of Odin and Frigga, right? He was one of the sons of Odin and Frigga, and he had a blind twin brother. His name flees me right now, but we're gonna get to it in a second. Now what is a mistletoe? This is what a mistletoe looks like. So there's a distinct difference. The holly plant has red berries, mistletoe has white berries. So now, mistletoe is an aerial parasitic plant that grows high in the boughs of trees. The mistletoe does not have roots and is dependent on its host for survival. So what happens with the mistletoe? Birds take the mistletoe seeds from tree to tree. So it's a parasitic plant. It grows off the power of other trees. So it'll be high on the oak tree. It'll be on different types of trees, but it doesn't have its own root in the ground. It grows off other trees. So now we're going to see the mythical history behind it and see why people kiss under the mistletoe. It says, although it is mainly associated with oak trees in Celtic mythology, the European variety grows on deciduous trees. The Latin name of American mistletoe, Phoradendron serotonum, means fora, Greek for thief, and dendron for tree. So when I say it's a parasitic plant, because it lives off the power of another tree, when you look at its original name tells you what it is, because it's stealing the nutrients from the tree, right, in order for it to flourish. So that's why it's given that name. It says, for tree, in reference to the fact that mistletoe sends its roots into the host tree, robbing it of its nutrients. Mistletoe is propagated primarily by birds who deposit the berries during flight. These berries quickly root in their new home, and in some places trees are green in winter from the mistletoe they host. So even though a tree could be barren, have no leaves on it, because of this mistletoe plant, it will give the appearance that the tree is green. Mistletoe in Celtic myth. In Celtic language, mistletoe means all heal. The ancient Celts believed mistletoe possessed miraculous healing powers and held the soul of the host tree. According to Francis X. Weiser, in his handbook of Christian feasts and customs, the mistletoe was a sacred plant in the pagan religion of the Druids in Britain. It was believed to have all sorts of miraculous qualities, the power of healing diseases, making poisons harmless, giving fertility to humans and animals, protecting from witchcraft, banning evil spirits, bringing good luck and great blessings. In fact, it was considered so sacred that even enemies who happened to meet beneath a mistletoe, now listen to this, enemies who happened to meet mistletoe in the forest will lay down their arms, exchange a friendly greeting, and keep a truce until the following day. So another, right? It's not exactly the Christmas tradition, right, of kissing under the mistletoe, but you see where it originates from, right? You make a truce, so you walk under a doorway and you bump into someone and you kiss them, and perhaps it will bring you love, or you and that person will hook up. So you see where in the pagan tradition where that came from. It says, from this old custom grew the practice of suspending mistletoe over a doorway or in a room as a token of goodwill and peace to all comers. In ancient times, the Druids held a special ceremony 5 days after the new moon following the winter solstice. Once again, the connection with the winter solstice. in which they cut the boards of the mistletoe from the sacred oak tree with the golden sickle. It was important that branches did not touch the ground and become contaminated. Then the priest divided up the boards into sprigs and distributed them among the people who believed the mistletoe protected them from storms and evil spirits. Once again, the association with these evergreen plants as being deterrents from evil spirits and witches. Mistletoe and Viking myth. Now we're going to go back to Balder here. Viking believes of mistletoe's powers were rooted in myth of the resurrection of Balder, the god of summer and sun. As the story goes, Balder had a dream in which he dies. The dream alarmed his mother, Frigga, a goddess of love and beauty. Like I told you, Frigga was married with Odin. And they have Balder. That was their second born son. The dream alarmed his mother, Frigga, the goddess of love and beauty, for if Balder died, so too will all life on earth. Frigga went to all the elements here, fire, water, and earth, as well as all the animals and plants on earth, and asked them to spare her son. Satisfied that she had secured the cooperation of all, Frigga assured Balder that he would live forever. But Balder had one enemy, Loki. Right? We heard about this when we look at the Avengers. Loki is part of the characters. God of evil. And Loki found one plant that Frigga had overlooked, mistletoe. Mistletoe grows neither on the ground or under the ground. Rather, it is an aerial parasite that has no roots of its own and attaches itself to the tree it grows on. Loki made a poison arrow tip with the mistletoe and tricked Balder's blind brother, Hoder, which was Balder's twin brother, into shooting the arrow and killing Balder. For 3 days, the earth grew dark and the skies poured rain. Each of the elements in turn tried to bring Balder back to life, but none was successful save for Frigga, his loving mother. Legend says that the tears she shed during those terrible 3 days turned into the white berries of the mistletoe plant. In her joy at Balder's resurrection, she reserved mistletoe's poisonous reputation, kissed everyone who passed beneath the tree on which it grew, and issued a decree that should one ever pass beneath the mistletoe, they should have a token kiss and no harm will befall them. So you see where kissing under the mistletoe comes from. From this story right there, from this mythology right here. So just showing you the mythic foundation of all these Christmas symbols and celebration. Santa Claus, and I believe these are my couple of last two slides. Santa Claus was created by merging Woden, which is Odin, one of the gods of Northland, with a Roman Catholic bishop who was canonized as saint. So let me just get to St. Nicholas. This is the saint that is combined with the whole Santa Claus mess. And who was St. Nicholas? He lived during the reigns of the Roman emperors, Diocletian, Maximilian, Constantine. Late in the 3rd century and into the 4th, when he was still a young man, Nicholas was consecrated Archbishop of Myra, a seaport town. He died on December 6th. This is his feast day. Varied and numerous legends gathered about his life on earth and his life as a saint after his death. St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas Eve is celebrated annually with the giving of gifts on the 5th of December. So this is where the tradition of giving gifts come from. The night before St. Nicholas Day in the northern Netherlands, and on the morning of 6th of December, St. Nicholas Day itself, in the Roman Catholic southern provinces, Belgium, Luxembourg, northern France, French Flanders, Lorraine, and Artois. He is also well known in the territories of the former Dutch Empire, including Aruba, Bonaire, Curaçao, and Suriname. He is the primary source of the popular Christmas icon of Santa Claus. And that concludes my presentation. I hope that you got something out of what I brought forth. And may the Most High God bless you.